Hello, everybody. Mr. J here. One of my favorite things about history is characters, the crazy people that we get to meet. And I want to introduce you to one of them today. His name is Lieutenant Colonel John Mad Jack Churchill. He was born in 1906 and he lived to 1996. You can see there his nickname is Mad Jack. Some other people also called him Fighting Jack. Now, why did he have these crazy nicknames? Well, Mad Jack Churchill is known for fighting World War II armed with a long bow, bagpipes, and a basket-hilted Scottish broadsword, as you can see in the picture right there. When asked about why he wore the sword all the time when he was fighting, his response was, "In my opinion, sir, any officer who goes into action without his sword is improperly dressed." Now, of course, his name wasn't really Mad Jack. He was christened John Malcolm Thorpe Fleming Churchill. He was born September 16th, 1906, in Hong Kong. His family moved around a lot when he was a kid, but he eventually graduated from the Royal Military Academy in 1926 and joined the British Army. So he's getting into the Army right there in the interwar period. He's after World War I, before World War II. So one of the first places he is stationed is in India in the early 30s. And this is where we see him perform one of his first crazy actions as a soldier. He needed to get across the country of India, a trip of 1,500 miles. And did Jack Churchill take a train or a car or a plane or anything else like that? No, he decided to take his motorbike. So he drove 1,500 miles the whole way across India on his motorcycle. He also made a similar trip through the country that was then known as Burma. That was a 500-mile trip. But the thing that was the crazy part is at that time there weren't really any roads where he was. So he's just going across the open terrain, and every time he needs to cross a river, he'd find a railroad bridge, and he would ride the bike across on the rail while he walked across on the ties, just hoping that no trains came. And fortunately for him, it doesn't seem that any ever really did. Now, Mad Jack was a pretty eccentric guy. He loved to play the bagpipes, for example. And his crazy antics, like playing the bagpipes and showing up on parade one morning with an umbrella because it was raining, eventually led to him resigning his commission and leaving the military in the mid-30s. So in this time between the wars, when he's out of the army, he became a male model. He became a movie extra. With his bagpipes, he placed second in his class at the 1938 Bagpiping Championships. He also took up archery and he shot for Britain at the 1939 World Archery Championships. Now, the archery thing is going to become important here in a second. So as World War II is getting started at the end of the 30s, Jack decides to get back into the British Army. So he comes back in, and by May of 1940, he is in France fighting against the Germans. He's covering the British retreat to Dunkirk, where they'll eventually be evacuated off of the beaches. And as part of his rearguard action, they decide that they're going to ambush a German patrol. And Jack says, "I'll fire the first shot. Everybody follow my lead." So he does. He fires the first shot, takes out the first German. His men all get up and start firing. They take the Germans down pretty quickly and easily. Pretty average thing. But no, he didn't take the guy down with a gun. He took him down with his longbow and an arrow, in the process becoming the only known British soldier in World War II to fell an enemy combatant with a bow and an arrow, and no one's done it since that we know of, so he's also the most recent one to do so. Keep in mind, this is in the spring of 1940. So after that exploit, Jack makes it back to the beach at Dunkirk, and he gets off the beach and is flown back to England. But at that point, he's starting to get a little bit bored, so he needs something else to do. So he starts to see that there is advertising going around to be a commando. Now, he has no idea what a commando is, but it sounds like it's dangerous and exciting and interesting, so he signs up. They send him to Scotland to train. He's highly successful. Also meets his wife, Rosamund, so that's going to be a big thing for him later. Eventually, his commando group is deployed to Norway to go and fight the Germans and try and take them out of some towns they're occupying. So in December of 1941, they make an amphibious landing to go get these Germans. And as the landing craft are coming towards the beach, Jack is standing in the front of his, playing his bagpipes as loud as he can. As they get up to the beach, he puts the bagpipes away, draws his sword, and wades ashore and charges into the midst of the Germans with his sword. This is another successful operation. They take the Germans out, take control of the town, and everything is great for that. So then by 1943, in the fall of 43, he's no longer in Norway. He has now been taken to Italy, where he's going to continue fighting against the Germans, working on landing at Salerno and the Allies moving up the peninsula. So they are in with the infantry, not quite what they're built to do, but okay. And what he decides to do is he takes one other man with him, and in the middle of the night, they jump into foxholes, brandish his sword, take a couple of prisoners. He takes one of those prisoners, uses that guy to calm down the other Germans around as he then jumps into their foxholes and takes them prisoner. By the time you get to morning, he has captured 42 German prisoners, all their weapons and gear, and a mortar they were manning. All of that without a single shot in the middle of the night, and brings them back to the British lines. Now, all of this success and craziness has got to catch up with him eventually. So by the fall of 1944, you have Jack Churchill fighting the Germans again in Yugoslavia, and they are sent to take a hill. They make it up to the top of the hill, taking heavy casualties, and they keep taking casualties once they're up there. And you get to a point where Jack is almost alone at the top of the hill. Everybody else that's up there is badly injured or killed. And he knows that he's surrounded by Germans. He's not going to get out. It's going to be the end for him. And so he pulls out his bagpipes and continues playing on the pipes until a German grenade quiets him and forces him to stop playing. Now, fortunately, Jack didn't actually die. He was captured. The Germans had a recent order from Hitler saying to kill all commandos. Fortunately, the German officer disobeyed that order. And in return, after the war, Jack found him and thanked him, and also helped him stay out of the hands of the Soviets, who likely would have killed that German. But since he was captured, he eventually ended up in Sachsenhausen concentration camp. He and a Royal Air Force member escaped in September 1944. They wanted to make it to the ocean to Allied forces, and they got a couple miles away and were recaptured. So he's back in German custody. Depending on whose story you believe, in the spring of 45, he either escaped again or was released. But then on a bum leg, he walked almost 100 miles until he found some American forces, and they picked him up. Now, by this time, the war is ending in Europe. Hitler is dead. The Germans have surrendered. So Jack is sent to the Pacific to go fight the Japanese. But before he can arrive and get to fighting, the Americans drop the atomic bombs, the Japanese surrender, and the war's over. Jack was not terribly pleased. He's quoted as saying, "If it hadn't been for those damned Yanks, we could have kept the war going for another 10 years. But no more war. It's okay. Jack will find some interesting things to do. At the age of 40, which is ancient for a paratrooper, he qualifies as a paratrooper jumping out of airplanes. He gets sent to Palestine and fights and risks his life and saves plenty of lives over there. He becomes an instructor at the Land Air Warfare School in Australia. While he's there, he learns to surf, becomes very good at it, designs his own board. And once he comes back to England, he goes out onto the Severn River. And as the tide comes in, it produces a 5-foot swell you can ride. And he became the first man ever to ride that as well. So Churchill eventually does retire from the army. He retires in 1959. By that time, he has 2 Distinguished Service Orders and a Military Cross. He takes a job with the Ministry of Defense, where he then decides he's going to have a little bit of fun, and he rides the commuter train back and forth to work every day. And on the way home, he just gets up every day, opens the window, and chucks his briefcase out the window, and then sits back down as though nothing had happened. And people, of course, thought he was nuts, but what they didn't realize is that his house is right by the railroad tracks, and he was throwing his briefcase out the window so it would land in his garden and he wouldn't have to carry it. Once he finally retired, Churchill kind of settled down a little bit. He and his wife sailed coal-fired steamboats on the Thames River. He was known for building and operating really, really intricate radio-controlled models of warships. Eventually, all good things come to an end, and Jack Churchill passed away at home in Surrey, England, March 8th, 1996. He was 89. If you want to sum this man up, I think the best thing you can find is something he wrote on a postcard to a friend whenever he was a younger soldier. The face of the postcard had his regimental colors on it, and what Jack Churchill wrote was this. It's a couplet from a poem. "No prince or lord has tomb so proud as he whose flag becomes his shroud.